The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. D'Esposito for his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel of witnesses. Today, we focus on the historic dollar cost of the failed policies of Secretary Mayorkas. Mr. Borelli, you served time in the state legislature, now in the city council for the great city of New York. You mentioned during your opening remarks that in 2023, New York City will bring up a bill of $4.7 billion with a B to fund the migrants coming into New York City. It's estimated that in 2024, we're going to see a minimum of $6 billion spent on the migrants coming in to New York City. Some of my colleagues mentioned that that number is bigger than their entire state's budget. Recently, it was announced, and I know that it was mentioned by my good friend from New York, Mr. Garbarino, about Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn. It has been chosen to shelter thousands of migrants. Do you know how much the city will be paying to lease Floyd Bennett Field from the federal government?
Yes, it's $21 million for the year, in addition to costs in terms of bringing infrastructure and other necessary items to the site.
So we're looking at about $1.7 million a month.
Correct.
Plus whatever it costs to, put the migrant shelter in place on Floyd Bennett Field.
Right. That doesn't include the operating costs of the actual facility. Right.
Now, obviously, you know that I served a career in the NYPD, and many of our specialty units call home to Floyd Bennett Field. Aviation, ESU, scuba. There is a Floyd Bennett Field Civil Air Patrol, Floyd Bennett Composite Squadron. There's the Marines 6th Communication Battalion. In addition to being a complete financial burden on New York City, as one of the few members of the city council that actually stands with law enforcement, wouldn't you agree that this is a major security risk for not only the residents of New York City, but the millions upon millions that come visit annually?
Yes, and I know of many members and chiefs of the NYPD who are part of those units on that facility have raised some objections about the security now that would be present on the site. I don't know of the result of that since this lease has only been about a week old, but it is certainly a concern. It wasn't a concern, though, when we talked about Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, which is the same situation, only it's an active military base where migrants would be, in theory, held.
Right, and I think what this shows, and it's very rare that Mayor Adams and I agree, but I do agree that this issue is going to destroy New York City. But what I also say is that the mayor touted the fact that New York City was a sanctuary city, but had absolutely no plans in place to actually serve as that sanctuary. Let's be very clear, when people cross this border, when people risk their lives, when people come into this country, they don't do it. They don't want to achieve the American dream living in a vacant hangar in JFK. That is not the American dream that they're coming here for. Staying on the subject, New York City has many departments. The ones that are probably most well known: the building department, sanitation, the FDNY, the NYPD, emergency management. Because of the financial burden, because of the historic costs that Mayorkas and the Biden administration are placing on New York City, the mayor, and whether I agree with it or not, you can't blame him because he's trying to find a solution to a problem, has called for a 5% reduction. Now, he wants to do that 3 times over the next 9 months, equaling 15%. In just 20 seconds, what do you think that's going to do to the city agencies that you oversee in New York?
You mentioned the fire department, the sanitation department, and the Office of Emergency Management. The burn rate of $10 million is more than we spend on all of that per day right now. So that's how much money in comparison to other city spending we're talking about. So there's no choice. It'll end up being, as we've been told already, the first thing to go will be overtime, which these agencies themselves are short-staffed as it is. So now you're going to reduce the man-hours for all of them across the board, essentially.
Right. So to the mayor's point that this issue is going to destroy New York City, it's not just housing the migrants, it's paying for the migrants, it's the historic cost. And people on the other side of the aisle, not here today, but have mentioned that Mayorkas has had an historic tenure. Mr. Chairman, the only thing that has been historic is the amount of narcotics coming over our southern border, the border crossings, the historic got-away numbers, the historic cartel criminal enterprises that are controlling our southern border, the historic failed operational control, the historic frustration, anger, and hopelessness from Customs and Border Patrol, and as we're focusing on today and what we've made clear, the historic dollar amount that Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden have cost this country. I yield back.
The gentleman